My name is Audrey Calloway. I'm 26 years old. And the morning of the most important day of my life, I was standing in front of a mirror at 5:15 a.m., holding a blazer that someone had destroyed the night before, staring at what they had done and making the decision to put it on anyway. But before I tell you what happened that morning, you need to understand where I came from. Because this story doesn't start the day I walked into that interview room. It starts in Harlan County, Kentucky, a place where the nearest hospital is 45 minutes away on a good day, where more than 28% of residents live below the poverty line, and where kids grow up learning early that some doors in this country are simply not built for people like them. I grew up in a 2-story house at the end of a gravel road with my parents and my younger sister Stella. We weren't poor in the way that makes the news. We were poor in the way that's invisible, the kind where you learn to be grateful for what you have and never say out loud what you don't. I decided I wanted to be a doctor when I was 16 years old. Not from a TV show. Not from a book. I decided it the night my mother sat in a regional emergency waiting room for 6 hours with chest pain she'd been ignoring for weeks because we didn't have insurance that covered a specialist. And she didn't want to be a burden. I sat beside her in a plastic chair under fluorescent lights and watched her try to make herself smaller so the nurses wouldn't notice how scared she was. I noticed. And something locked into place inside me that night that never moved again. 4 years of college on a partial scholarship. A MCAT retake I paid for myself by working double shifts at a diner off Route 119, coming home at 2 a.m. Smelling like grease and coffee, studying until sunrise. 200 hours at a free clinic in Lexington. And an independent research paper on maternal mortality rates in rural southern counties, the kind of work that comes from someone who didn't just study the problem, but grew up inside it. Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. Interview date, March 4th. Acceptance rate under 3.8%. I had one blazer. Navy blue, wool blend, bought secondhand from a consignment shop in Middlesboro for $18. Dry cleaned. Pressed. Tried on 5 times. It was hanging on the back of my closet door like a piece of armor, because that is exactly what it was. I had protected that blazer like it was irreplaceable. Because for me, it was. But there was someone else in that house who knew exactly what that blazer meant to me. And that's precisely why they chose it. I found out what Stella had done at 7:45 that morning. I had come downstairs for breakfast like any other day: toast, black coffee, the kind of quiet that fills a house before the rest of the world wakes up. I was running through interview questions in my head between sips. My hands were steady. My mind was focused. For one brief moment, standing in that kitchen in the early morning light, I actually believed the hardest part of the day was behind me. I was wrong. When I walked back into my room, I smelled it before I saw it. Sharp. Chemical. Wrong. The kind of smell that doesn't belong in a bedroom, the kind that tells you, before your brain has even finished processing, that something has been deliberately ruined. I crossed the room in 3 steps. The blazer was still on the hanger, exactly where I had left it. But when I lifted it toward the window, toward the pale gray light coming through the curtains, I saw them. Bleach stains. Not a splash. Not an accident. Pale, uneven splotches spreading across the left shoulder, running down the lapel, bleeding into the front panel in a pattern too deliberate, too thorough, too considered to be anything other than what it was. Someone had stood in my room and poured bleach onto the one thing I needed most on the one day I needed it. My hands weren't shaking yet. I think some part of my mind was still trying to find another explanation, a spill, a mistake, some version of this that didn't mean what I knew it meant. But there was no other explanation. The pattern didn't lie. The deliberateness of it didn't lie. I thought about Stella. 23 years old, still living at home, still moving through life with the particular sourness of someone who has decided the world owes them something they can never quite name. For 4 years, every milestone I reached had been met with the same response: silence, or something worse than silence. When I got the partial scholarship to college, she left the dinner table without a word. When my research paper was accepted for publication, she changed the subject so fast it was almost impressive. It wasn't rivalry. Rivalry implies two people running the same race. What Stella felt was something older and colder than that, something that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with herself. But I had been paying the price for it my entire life. I carried the blazer downstairs. The kitchen felt smaller when I walked into it. My mother was at the counter refilling her coffee, back turned to the door. Stella was at the table, cereal in front of her, scrolling her phone with the focused disinterest of someone performing the act of not paying attention. I held the blazer up and said, as calmly as I could manage, "Stella, did you do this?" She didn't look up immediately. When she did, her expression was perfectly, almost artfully, blank. "I don't know what you're talking about." 3 seconds of silence. I turned to my mother. She set her mug down slowly, looked at the blazer, looked at me, and then her face made a decision. I watched it happen in real time. She looked at the evidence in my hands, and she chose not to see it. "Audrey, stop. It's just a jacket. You're making this into something it doesn't need to be." Footsteps in the hallway. My father appeared in the doorway, still in his work shirt from the night before. He took in the scene, me, the blazer, my mother's expression, and without asking a single question, without even looking at what I was holding, he said, "Listen to your mother. Don't start something on a day like today." And that was it. That was the full weight of their response to their daughter's only professional clothing being destroyed the night before the most critical interview of her life. I looked at Stella one more time. She had gone back to her phone. Her spoon moved through her cereal with the slow, deliberate calm of someone who had done exactly what they intended to do and knew they were going to get away with it. I had grown up in that house for 26 years. I had watched my parents look the other way 100 times at smaller cruelties, at moments where choosing peace meant choosing her over me. I had told myself distance was enough, that I was strong enough to outrun it. Standing in that kitchen, blazer in hand, 2 hours from the most important interview of my life, I finally understood that I had never outrun anything. I had just been waiting for this moment to find me. I turned around and walked back upstairs without another word. But here's what I need you to understand, the part of the story that nobody ever talks about. It wasn't the bleach that nearly broke me that morning. It was the silence of the two people who watched me hold up the proof and chose to look away. I closed my bedroom door behind me. Not slammed. Closed. Quietly, deliberately, the way you close a door when you are trying very hard to hold something together that is threatening to come apart at every seam. I crossed the room, sat down on the edge of the bed, and laid the blazer across my lap. The morning light had shifted. Coming through the window at a lower angle now, the bleach stains looked almost iridescent pale and uneven against the navy blue, the damaged fibers catching the sun in a way that almost looked intentional. For a few seconds I just sat there, running my thumb along the edge of one of the larger patches, feeling where the wool had changed texture, where it had gone from soft and structured to something brittle and altered. Something that could not be undone. And then I started to cry. Not the kind of crying that comes with sound. The kind that comes with pressure, a tightness behind the eyes that builds until your vision blurs and your chest does something complicated and there is nothing to do but let it move through you. I didn't try to stop it. I had learned a long time ago that the tears you swallow don't disappear, they just go somewhere quieter inside you and wait. So, I let myself feel every single layer of it. The rage first. Hot and immediate, the kind that rises when you realize someone looked at the thing you cared about most and chose it because you cared about it. Stella hadn't ruined a jacket. She had looked at 4 years of 2A.M. study sessions and double shifts and deferred dreams, and found the one physical object that represented all of it, and poured bleach on it, in the dark, alone, quietly, without even the courage to admit it afterward. Then the humiliation. The particular kind that comes not from what was done to you, but from who watched it happen and said nothing. My mother's face when she looked at the evidence and chose not to see it. My father's voice, "Listen to your mother," as if fairness was a disruption to be managed rather than a thing worth standing up for. 26 years of learning to make myself smaller in that house, to carry my victories like contraband so they wouldn't be taken from me. And underneath all of it, the grief. The slow, heavy grief of a person who has finally run out of ways to pretend that the people who were supposed to protect them were ever really going to. I gave myself 10 minutes. I know that sounds precise. It was. I looked at the clock on my nightstand and I made myself a promise. 10 minutes. Feel everything. Hold nothing back. And then get up. The clock moved. I breathed. The light in the room shifted again. At minute 10, I stood up. I turned on the overhead light full brightness. No softness laid the blazer flat on the bed, and looked at it directly. No more holding it up at angles, trying to find a version of the damage that was less than it was. I looked at it for what it was. The stains were not going anywhere. The navy had bled into pale, washed-out patches almost marbled, almost silvery in the direct light spreading across the shoulder, the lapel, the front panel. No concealing it. No steaming it away. I got out the iron anyway. I pressed every inch of that blazer. Ran the steamer over it 3 times, watching the fabric respond to heat the way it always had except for the damaged parts, which responded to nothing. I held it up one final time under the brightest light in the room and made myself say it out loud, quietly, just to hear the words in my own voice. This is what I have. This is what I'm walking in with. And something shifted when I said it. Because there is a difference, a significant, interior difference between wearing something ruined because you have no choice and deciding that what you are wearing is exactly what you meant to wear. One is defeat. The other is something else entirely. I couldn't change the blazer, but I could change what it meant. Those stains were not the story of what someone had taken from me. They were the story of what I had survived to get here. I put on my white blouse, my black trousers, my only pair of good heels. And then I picked up the blazer and put it on slowly, deliberately, like a decision being made one button at a time. Before I reached for my bag, I opened the top drawer of my nightstand and took out a folded piece of paper. Small, worn at the creases, the handwriting of a 16-year-old girl sitting in a fluorescent-lit waiting room while her mother tried to make herself invisible. The reasons I had written the night I decided what I was going to do with my life. The real ones, not the ones you say in interviews, but the ones that live in the part of you that doesn't perform for anyone. I slipped it into the inside pocket of the blazer, right against my chest. Then I looked in the mirror one last time. The stains were still there. They were always going to be there. But the woman looking back at me was standing straight, shoulders back, chin level, eyes clear. Not performing confidence. Not pretending the morning hadn't happened. Just standing in what she had, and choosing to walk out the door anyway. I picked up my keys. I didn't say goodbye to anyone in that house. Some exits don't require words. The drive from Harlan County to Baltimore is 2 hours and 15 minutes on a clear day. I know because I had driven it once before 6 months earlier, just to make sure I knew the route, just to make sure there would be no surprises on the day that mattered. That was the kind of person I was. I didn't leave things to chance. I prepared. I mapped. I accounted for every variable I could control because I had grown up in a life where too many variables were beyond my reach, and I had learned early that the only answer to uncertainty was preparation so thorough it left no room for doubt. That morning, I left the house at 7:58 a.m. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't put on a podcast. I drove in complete silence, just the sound of the engine, the hum of the highway, the occasional truck passing and sending a brief shudder through the car. I had spent weeks preparing what I would say in that room. But somewhere around the second hour, on I-68 East with the Appalachian Ridgeline in the rearview mirror, I made a quiet decision. I was going to stop rehearsing. Whatever came out of my mouth in that room today was going to be real, not polished, not performed, not the careful language I had spent weeks constructing. I had lived inside the things I was going to talk about. I didn't need a script for my own life. I parked 2 blocks from the admissions building at 10:12 a.m. I sat in the car for 3 minutes. Not from hesitation, from intention. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. The blazer was visible from that angle. The stains on the shoulder caught the late morning light coming through the windshield. I looked at them for a long moment. Then I got out of the car. The lobby of the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine admissions building smelled like heated air and old wood and the particular institutional quiet of a place that takes itself seriously. I checked in, took my name tag, and walked into the waiting area. 8 other applicants. Press suits. Expensive blazers in charcoal and black and deep burgundy. Leather portfolios. The kind of quiet, controlled confidence that comes either from genuine preparation or from never having had a reason to doubt that a room like this was built for you. I sat down in the chair nearest the window. I did not cross my arms. I did not look down at my lap. I did not let my eyes move to my own shoulder to check the stains the way every anxious instinct in my body was urging me to do. I sat straight, hands resting still on my knees, and looked at the room with the same expression I intended to carry through the door when they called my name. Calm. Present. Unapologetic. Because here is what I understood by that point the moment I apologized for that blazer with my posture, with my eyes, with any unconscious gesture of shame. I had already lost something that no interview could give back. They called my name at 11:03 a.m. The interview room was smaller than I had imagined. A rectangular table, 2 chairs facing each other, a window on the far wall letting in a narrow column of white winter light. Dr. Martin Ashford was already seated, a man in his late 50s, silver-haired, with the particular stillness of someone who has sat across from thousands of people and learned exactly how much can be read in the first 10 seconds of a room. He looked up from my file when I entered. His eyes moved to my face first. Then, briefly, unmistakably, to my blazer. To the left shoulder. The lapel. The front panel. He took it in, not with shock, not with politely suppressed discomfort, but with something closer to attention. The way a person looks at something when they are trying to understand it rather than simply react to it. He reached beside his desk. From a manila envelope he withdrew a single document and placed it on the table next to my application. I recognized it before I could read the header. The embossed seal of the National Rural Health Association. The Certificate of Recognition for the Annual Undergraduate Research Award. My research paper on maternal mortality rates in rural southern counties, submitted under my full name, Audrey May Calloway, had won their national award 8 months earlier. Dr. Ashford set his pen down, leaned back slightly, and looked at me with an expression I had not prepared for, not the professional neutrality of an admissions interview, but something more unguarded. Something that looked almost like recognition. Wait, he said quietly. You're her. Not a question. A confirmation. The way someone speaks when a name they have been carrying in the back of their mind suddenly walks through a door and sits down in front of them. I held his gaze without flinching. That depends on who you're looking for, sir. Something shifted in the room when I said it. Not dramatically. Just a small, interior shift, the kind that happens when 2 people simultaneously understand that the conversation they are about to have is going to be different from the one either of them expected. He smiled. Not the practiced smile of a man who has conducted thousands of interviews. A real one, the kind that starts in the eyes before it reaches the mouth. He told me he had been on the selection committee for the award that year. That my paper had not been the easy choice. That he had argued for it in a room full of people inclined toward the familiar. And then he said something I have never forgotten. Your research had a quality I rarely encounter in undergraduate submissions. You didn't write about rural health disparity the way someone writes about a problem they've studied. You wrote about it the way someone writes about a place they've actually lived. There's a difference, and most people can't manufacture it. I looked at him steadily and said, I grew up 40 minutes from the county with the lowest physician-to-patient ratio in the state. My mother sat in an emergency waiting room for 6 hours because we couldn't afford a specialist. I wasn't studying the problem, sir. I was writing my way out of it. He picked up his pen and wrote something on his notepad. I didn't ask what it was. What followed was 57 minutes, 27 minutes longer than scheduled. We talked about the research, the free clinic, why medicine rather than public health policy, what kind of doctor I intended to become. I answered every question without the language I had rehearsed from the place where the real answers lived, the ones I had never needed to practice because they were simply true. Somewhere around the 25th minute, Dr. Ashford paused. set his pen down, and looked just briefly, just once at my blazer. At the pale bleached patches on the shoulder and lapel. At the marbled discoloration across the front panel. Then he looked back at me. "It took courage," he said quietly. "Walking in here today." I looked down at the stains on my lapel. At the evidence of what that morning had been. At the thing Stella had meant as an ending that I had carried 2 hours down a highway and into this room and set down on the table between us like a credential. I'm not sure courage is the right word, sir. This was the only option I had left. I just decided it was enough. He wrote something else on his notepad. When I stood to leave, Dr. Ashford extended his hand across the table. Firm. Unhurried. It was a privilege, Miss Calloway. I mean that. I walked out into the cold Baltimore air and stood on the front steps for a moment, just breathing. My hands were not shaking. I had expected the shaking to come eventually. Instead, there was something quieter, something steadier. The particular stillness that settles into you when you have done the hardest thing the day asked of you and come out the other side not intact, exactly, but real. Fully, completely, undeniably real. I walked back to my car and sat in the driver's seat for a long time without starting the engine. Outside, Baltimore moved around me: traffic, pedestrians, the ordinary machinery of a city that had no idea what had just happened inside that building. I sat in the quiet and let myself understand something I hadn't been ready to understand before I walked in. What Stella had meant as destruction had become the most visible thing about me in that room. The stains she poured onto my jacket in the dark, alone, quietly, without the courage to admit it had made me impossible to forget. She had reached for the one thing she thought would stop me. And it had become the exact detail that made a 21-year veteran of admissions remember my face. She had tried to take something from me. And she had accidentally handed me everything. 7 weeks later, I was standing at the mailbox at the end of our gravel driveway when I saw the envelope. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late April. The kind of afternoon that arrives in Kentucky without announcement: pale sun, cold air with the first suggestion of something warmer underneath it, the smell of wet earth and last year's leaves along the tree line. I hadn't slept well the night before. I had trained myself, deliberately, not to expect anything in those weeks because hope is a weight, and I had been carrying enough weight already. The return address was Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, Baltimore, Maryland. I stood at the mailbox and looked at it for a long moment without opening it. Just held it. The cold air moved through the tree line. A truck passed on the road behind me. The ordinary world continued at its ordinary pace. Completely indifferent to the fact that everything I had worked toward for 4 years was contained in an envelope I was holding with both hands at the end of a gravel road in Harlan County. I opened it. I read it once. Then again. Then a third time, not because I hadn't understood it, but because some things need to be read more than once before your body catches up to what your eyes are telling it. Dear Miss Calloway, it is with great pleasure that we offer you admission to the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. Full merit scholarship. One of 96 students selected from a pool of more than 4,500 applicants. I stood at that mailbox long enough that the sun moved. Long enough that I stopped reading and just stood there, holding the letter against my chest, looking at nothing in particular: the gravel, the tree line, the pale April sky above the ridgeline. I wasn't crying. I wasn't celebrating. I was doing something quieter than either of those things. I was understanding that it was real. That 4 years of double shifts and deferred sleep and a MCAT retake paid for in crumpled diner tips, that all of it had accumulated into something. That the girl who had sat in a fluorescent-lit waiting room at 16 watching her mother try to disappear had actually done the thing she had promised herself she would do. I folded the letter, put it in my jacket pocket, walked back up the gravel driveway and into the house. My mother was in the kitchen when I came in. She looked up, registered something in my face she couldn't quite name, and went still. I didn't say anything. I took the letter from my pocket, unfolded it, and laid it flat on the kitchen table. Then I sat down and waited. She crossed the room slowly. Picked it up. Read it. I watched her face the way I had watched it in that same kitchen 7 weeks earlier, looking for what it would choose to show me. What moved across her expression was complicated, something between genuine pride and the particular shame of a person who knows, in the moment of someone else's triumph, that they have not earned the right to stand in the warmth of it. She set the letter down. "Audrey," she said softly, "I always knew you would." I looked at her. At the woman who had stood in this kitchen 7 weeks ago and looked at a ruined blazer and chosen not to see it. At the woman who had said it's just a jacket while I stood there holding the evidence of what had been done to me on the most important morning of my life. "Please don't," I said. Not harshly. Just clearly. 2 words, quiet and final, like a door being closed gently but completely. She stopped. Nodded once, the nod of a person who understands they have been seen, fully and without mercy, and has no argument left to make. My father came in a few minutes later. Read the letter standing at the counter, back half turned to the room. When he finished, he walked over and extended his hand. I shook it. That was the most he had ever known how to give me. I had spent a long time being angry about that, measuring what I received against what I had needed and finding the difference unbearable. But that Tuesday afternoon, I found I could accept it for exactly what it was. A hand extended. A gesture that said, in the only language he had ever learned to speak, "I see you." It was enough. Not because it was sufficient, but because I had stopped needing it to be more than it was. Stella was not in the kitchen. She never said a word about the blazer. Not that day, not in the weeks that followed, not in the quiet months. Between that April afternoon and the August morning, I packed my car and left Harlan County for Baltimore. No apology. No acknowledgement. Nothing. I waited for a long time to feel something about that silence. Anger, mostly, at first. Then, something duller, the exhaustion of waiting for an apology from someone who has made their peace with never giving one. And then, gradually, something unexpected, relief. Because I didn't need Stella's apology to complete the story. The story was already complete. What she had meant as an ending had become the most important detail of a beginning, and nothing she said now could add to or subtract from what had already happened in that room in Baltimore. She had tried to make me smaller. And I had walked into the most important room of my life wearing the proof of her attempt and come out the other side with everything. The blazer is in my closet now. Not the closet in Harlan County. My closet in my apartment in Baltimore, 3 blocks from campus. I hung it there the first week I arrived, before I'd even finished unpacking, because I knew exactly where it needed to be. I don't wear it anymore. It has done what it needed to do. But I look at it sometimes before a practical exam that will test me at the edges of what I know, before a clinical rotation that will ask more of me than I feel ready to give, before any moment where I need to remember what I am actually made of. In the inside pocket, still there, still folded at the same creases, is the piece of paper I slipped in the morning. I drove to Baltimore. The list I wrote at 16 in a waiting room while the fluorescent lights hummed above me. The reasons. The real ones. The ones that were never about prestige or rankings or proving something to a family that looked away. They were always about the woman in that waiting room. They were always about the county with the lowest physician-to-patient ratio in the state. About the people who grow up learning that certain doors are not built for them and who grow up anyway and find the doors and walk through them wearing whatever they have left. I think about Stella sometimes. Not with anger that passed. Not with forgiveness exactly, that is a more complicated thing than people make it sound, and I am still somewhere in the middle of it. I think about her with a clear-eyed sorrow for a person who spent so much energy trying to prevent someone else from rising that she never looked up long enough to ask what she might have built for herself. I think about my parents. About the specific, painful love of people who were never taught how to protect the things that mattered. About the ways we carry our parents' limitations inside us until we decide, consciously and deliberately, to set them down. I set them down. Not on the morning of the interview. Not when the letter arrived. Slowly, over time, the way you set down something heavy, carefully, with both hands, making sure it doesn't break anything when it hits the floor. Here is what I know now, 2 years into medical school. There are people in this world who will look at everything you have worked for, every late night, every sacrifice, every quiet act of persistence that nobody saw, and they will reach for the most vulnerable thing they can find and try to take it from you. Not because they want what you have, but because they cannot tolerate the idea of watching you have it. They will pour bleach on your armor the night before your battle. They will stand in a kitchen and look at the evidence and choose not to see it. They will tell you it's just a jacket. What they do not understand, what Stella never understood, what my parents are still slowly beginning to understand, is that the people who are meant to reach the places they are reaching for will find a way to get there. Wearing whatever they have left. Carrying whatever the morning gave them. Walking into rooms they were never supposed to be in, and refusing with every quiet certainty they have spent a lifetime building to apologize for being there. I walked into Johns Hopkins School of Medicine with a ruined blazer and a piece of paper in my pocket and the unshakable knowledge of someone who has survived the people who were supposed to love them. I walked out with everything I had ever worked for. I did it alone. The way I have always done everything that mattered. And if there is someone watching this right now who is standing in their own version of that kitchen, holding their own version of that blazer, I want you to hear this clearly. The thing they used to try to break you is not the end of your story. It is the detail that makes you impossible to forget. Go put it on. If this story moved you, subscribe. Every week, we bring you real stories of people who refuse to stay broken. What's coming next week you don't want to miss.